Welcome to Module 9, Day 9 of how to find your first Cleveland rental property in 26 and 27. So today we're looking at how to find the deals the right way. And in summary, before we start, you can look on the MLS, you can go with wholesalers, and you can go with relationships. Okay. For those just starting out, you're really looking at the MLS. Wholesalers are ones you have to get a list of. And relationships, well, that just only comes by doing deals already. So that's usually not a startup unless a bunch of people from growing up in the Cleveland area. I'm also offering a list, by the way. I'm going to get into ways of finding it and some more ideas. But if you just text whatever phone number or email the word deals, we'll send you back a list of specific resources. So people that can go help you find deal, like realtor specialists, wholesaler lists. And again, by referring these, we're not personally saying that these people are not perfect, but we're saying that here, these are the people that are known for doing this, right? So I'm not giving you any personal referral there or taking liability because there's always risk. However, this will speed you up in terms of making those connections that you need to find a great deal. So the MLS is the multiple listing service, if you didn't know. I don't know, you're familiar with what that means. And that's basically created by realtors originally, which realtors are a private industry group nationwide of real estate agents and real estate brokers that sell houses. Okay. So it's created by the realtors as a computer exchange for sharing listings. So I could find a house that I'm selling, and then other realtors can show that house that I found that I am listing, and we'll cooperate together to sell houses. So it's come a long way since it was created many years ago. Even pre-computer, there was the MLS, and they had books that they would pass around to real estate offices. So it's come a long way since then. And so you can, because they have their own marketing, and it also gets passed on to many other websites that are not the MLS. So it goes to realtor.com first, and then many other websites of different brokers and even Zillow, other real estate websites. So it reaches a very large market. Houses are on the MLS. And frankly, that's both good and bad. So there's extra regulation to help protect you. That's especially important when you're dealing with like a house that's supposed to be ready to go or turnkey. There's a lot of regulation on disclosure. And there's a professional whose license on the line who is trying to make sure this deal goes smoothly and that no one's stolen from or robbed, because there's all these licensing requirements. And usually there's two professionals. So a lot of times you as a buyer have a professional. That's changed a little bit. There was recently an antitrust lawsuit that was filed a couple of years ago against the National Association of Realtors of over $1 billion payout. And it didn't change things a whole lot, but it did define things a little bit differently in terms of how we talk about realtors representing buyers versus sellers. I won't say too much more than that, but still, the net effect is that many times buyers end up going directly to the listing realtor rather than using the buyer's agent. That being said, it still makes sense to have a buyer's agent if you're using the MLS, or it may make sense. And what you get with a buyer's agent is someone that actually is required by law, with their license at stake, their ability to make money, to represent your best interest. Similar to an attorney, they're owed a duty of care to you specifically, a fiduciary duty. They have to act in your best interest. That doesn't always happen. A lot of times not, but we're paying them to act in your best interest, and they're required to. And there's an oversight body that you can complain to called the Division of Real Estate within the state of Ohio, right? And so that lowers the risk dramatically when you're going into a transaction to just offer based on the MLS, but also with lower risk means higher prices, right? So a higher trust marketplace always means that people are willing to pay more because they get value out of the trust in that marketplace. And so there is extra trust because of all the layers of oversight, from the National Association of Realtors, to the Division of Real Estate, state of Ohio, to all the laws interleaved around that, right? And the way that the local associations of real estate create preset contracts that create trust and understanding, and there's fewer surprises, and all the tradition with the local title companies doing closings. So all of that creates a lot of stability and trust. But also, if you're really looking for a deal, especially in this market right now, there's not a ton of bank-owned distressed houses. There are some, and oftentimes they go for more than you'd think they should. That's just the market, right? So that doesn't mean that they're not there, and they're not even that they're on the MLS. So you should look. You should be willing to do things like follow up. So this is true in any transactional business, that you'll see a property you think that could be good, and you make an offer lower than what you think is reasonable, and they don't think the seller doesn't think is reasonable. Tracking your offers that you buy through the MLS makes sense. So you track these offers on the MLS that you made an offer, on, and then you wait and you look back, see, has it sold yet? And you make the offer again. Okay. Especially with banks, follow-up offers make sense, following up, but really any seller, the longer it stays on the market, the more motivated they become, usually. With banks, it's especially true because they oftentimes have quarterly financial goals. And so they have to get maybe REOs off the books and things like that. So I've definitely gotten deals from banks that were owned by banks on the MLS by follow-up, just by follow-up. That's one of the things to remember. It's a basic thing, but you want to work that way. Having a buyer's agent means that somebody's there to help schedule appointments or go look at a property on your behalf. Somebody that can help compare multiple different properties on the market. They can help you analyze. They're there to meet the inspector sometimes. And the big caveat being that if you're looking at like really low end property and you're say making like 20 offers for everyone that gets accepted, and you like, there's going to be a point where the agent starts to think, I don't know if I'm going to get paid. And a lot of times that buyer's agent is going to want to have you sign an agreement up front that's semi-exclusive, at least with them, that if they're going to do the work, they will get paid because they're a professional. And if they're not, why are they doing work? Part of the recent NARP settlement requires them to actually have that agreement signed to even do work at all. So that's a new development. So it makes sense if you find the right one. Doesn't mean that you can't do some minor work with a buyer's agent, ask some questions and not have that agreement signed. But if they're going to be going and looking at properties on your behalf, which you may need, and you really need, it really helps to have somebody that can go take actual pictures, put real eyes on the property, and perhaps shoot a video to walk through. An investor buyer's agent is someone that usually can do something like that. At the very least, they understand what you want and they can evaluate it based on significant experience. What's going to happen here? Maybe refer you some contractors to help out if you need some work done. Some of investor buyer's agents will even function as a project manager. I've seen that happen. Those guys tend to get pretty busy pretty fast, unfortunately. So, but I definitely recommend if you can find a great buyer's agent, do it. They're definitely worth the commitment. And usually you're not going to pay that much more, even though technically you're agreeing to pay. Normally you can negotiate that into the sale of the price. There's some regulations on how you can even claim who's paying what that are very nuanced with that NARPM settlement I talked about. But again, I definitely recommend a buyer's agent if you can find one that you think that you trust and is good. And especially if they can help you after the sale on some things in terms of resources for renovating or taking a look at things and things like that. Some buyer's agents actually will charge per visit to a property. And frankly, that might be what's required to motivate them, right? Like if you're looking at like a very small commission, that's a very iffy. If you're looking at that, that might be something. And there is one buyer's agent, which I'll include, that actually will do that for people bidding on sheriff sales. So sheriff sales do seem to be starting to come back a little bit. He won't do that for everybody. He pre-qualifies them, but I'll include that in the list if you text or reply in the email or text message deals. His name is Matthew Klein, and that's somebody you can look at in terms of possibly even getting deals from bank sheriff sales, that's like when it's a foreclosure, they sell it at auction, right? So let's talk a little about wholesalers. I've mentioned wholesalers several times already. Some people know what they are, some people do not. Let me give you just a little background of what it means to buy a house through a wholesaler. So first of all, wholesalers typically are not licensed agents. And it's one of these like dirty little secrets. Like wholesalers are not well loved by the Division of Real Estate because they view a lot of what wholesalers do as like brokering real estate, which requires a license, but without a license. And depending on how they do it, either they're directly violating the law or they're in a gray area that they'll do it just technically right. They probably won't get in trouble. But the Division of Real Estate that regulates real estate brokerage does not love it. Okay, let's just put it this way. So they probably, in my opinion, fulfill a necessary role because they operate in a market that oftentimes real estate agents are not incentivized to even be in. And so they won't do it. And so in fact, many markets, they're almost the only game in town for buying distressed properties, at least at this point in time. And so I do have a list of wholesalers, and this is just, again, not a recommendation. It's just a list. Say, hey, call through these wholesalers and get on their list. And what they're essentially doing is they're going, and many of these wholesalers are making, the big ones have budgets of $30,000 to $100,000 a month, direct marketing to find people that haven't even said they wanted to market their house. A lot of times these are very distressed houses. They're doing direct mail campaigns, pay-per-click, video ads, YouTube. They're just going all out and spending huge amounts of money. And then they have hard sales on these sellers. They're making offers to these sellers. Sometimes they're misrepresenting a little bit what they're actually doing. A lot of times they're not explaining that they're wholesaling. They're not actually buying themselves. Sometimes they are buying themselves and they're still wholesaling. There's a number of nuances, which I could go into, but I won't explain all of them. All I'll say is that they're going direct to sellers, not banks usually, and negotiating prices, and they're offering it at a higher price and trying normally. Most wholesalers are not actually closing. They're either trying to do what's called a double close, where in one day they close and then sell it to you, and they literally sign all the paperwork and file it simultaneously. Okay. So there's that. A lot of them are actually getting contracts and they'll assign their rights to that contract for a fee. So if they got a contract for 50,000 and they want to sell it for 70. And yes, sometimes they will do that without any work. And if you want to do the deal, you have to agree to the fact that somebody's going to make a lot of money and you think, I could have done it, but you also didn't have a $50,000 marketing budget or something, right? So sometimes you're looking and you're thinking, oh man, I'm getting stolen from. But you got to look at it as, hey, either it makes sense for you to do the deal or not, right? And allow them to. So they're literally, if they got it for 50 and sell it for 70, they're going to advertise, tell you, hey, you can buy this for 70. When it comes to close, you're going to actually buy it for 50 and then write an additional check for $20,000. For that reason, a lot of wholesalers do not allow you to borrow money. They want a cash transaction or a cash transaction through maybe a hard money lender. And they want a guaranteed close. They want to, because they'll lose their original deal. They have a timeline on their deal to close, right? Or they might be forced to come up with the cash themselves to close and then hold it, and they're trying to avoid that, right? So again, it's this weird segment in our market that is what it is. And you got to be willing to deal with it as is. And because of that, also, there's like zero fiduciary responsibility. Now, it's not this is not really a consumer market. We're talking, you guys are all running businesses, right? So there's not the consumer controls on this to protect you. I'm not saying there's no controls for ethicalness and fraud and all that. Like that all applies. All the law around fraud and telling the truth and things like that. But there's no responsibility for these wholesalers to look after your best interest. Okay. And also, generally, you don't get the inspection. There is such a timeline. Only way for them to do this deal is to say, hey, evaluate it as good as you can. Maybe you'll be lucky if you or a representative can walk through. And I'll just say from experience, I've seen it where the original seller that they haven't closed on yet, they'll schedule like 10, 15, 20 people to go through. And that wholesaler like in another state. And they'll tell this seller, hey, I got an inspector coming. And then like 20 people show up. It becomes this big mess. I've seen it happen. Listen, it's the Wild West on wholesaling. Some wholesalers are better than others. You got to look at the deal, figure if you got enough information, be willing to deal with weird markets. Probably if you're doing much in the way of renovation, or a lot of these come through wholesalers right now. It just is. Hopefully they're doing the right thing. There shouldn't be too much liability as long as you don't make a big mistake on how much repairs need made. You can ensure clear title. So you're normally still working with like a title company, right? But again, it is what it is. You're taking a lot more risk with a wholesaler. There's not the same controls. And so it is a way to find properties. I mentioned briefly bids on sheriff sale properties. Those are starting to come back a little bit. Not a lot. It's probably not a big opportunity, but you have to recognize also you have even less ability to see that property with the sheriff sales. So with sheriff sales, Cuyahoga County and Lorain County, I believe you can bid online nowadays. And if not, you can use somebody that's like, I know of one contact that for some people will do inspections and they'll actually be able to get in some properties and at the very well do a nice outside inspection of these properties on sheriff sales. So again, text deals if you're interested in that, but sheriff sales, I would say, are not a big thing. And as an aside, if you want to direct market, there's a lot of courses on direct marketing for house buying, we buy houses type stuff. It's hard to do if you're not really aggressive, if this is not your business. Like if that's not your full-time business, don't even bother. It takes a lot of time. It's not a part-time thing. It's very expensive up front, and you got to have a full funnel. So you have to have the ability and skill to do hard closings, because when you're paying $2,000, $3,000, $4,000, $5,000, $10,000, $15,000 a month, you got to make money with those leads, right? And so I think a lot of the wholesalers, even with their excessive amounts of money that they're making per deal, a lot of them are paying 25 to 50% of that in even with hard closing, and all learning a lot of through experience, and they're still only making like 50% of that in like gross profit, which not bad. But the risk is like close rate changes slightly in the market, and they go from making a lot of money to several months of paying huge amounts of money out and then having to close down, right? So that's a whole other business is what I'm saying. So you can do direct marketing if you want to go find sellers direct. You got to negotiate, you got to figure it out, you got to have all the systems, and then you can only probably buy so much. So normally it just doesn't make sense. The other thing is relationships. Talking to, as you're doing business, if you're out of town, you're not going to really have those relationships. But as you're doing business, contractors, attorneys, you can tell everybody and network and be crazy. They can be like a network marketing, get into it, and you're just like telling everybody like how to get saved, hey, I buy houses, right? You can do that. Again, that's some people's jams, sometimes not. Obviously, if you've been doing business for a while, people start to know that what you do and they will come to you with deals. But even me, I do a lot of deals. I don't have a lot of people coming to me deals, partially because I don't do that. Like I don't go tell people what I'm doing. So you really have to work that. And that's a whole nother business itself, is developing relationships to get deals. And it takes years of doing that. So probably on your first time, that's not a good source either. So generally, MLS is really the best for your first time. And then if you're willing to do a little more risk, wholesalers, and it's competitive on either. There's a lot of competition out there. So really know what you want, understand why you're doing it, and understand the money, and be ready to make an offer. And make sure you've done everything up till now and you'll be ready. So there you go. Tomorrow, we're going to be talking about estimating repairs realistically. So if you've decided to do a light renovation or a burr, we'll go through a little bit more and offer a little tool on that as well. So looking forward to talking to you on that. And till tomorrow, ciao. Give us any questions. Feel free to schedule with our representative of property management tomorrow.